Have you ever been in a room full of people and still felt completely invisible? Imagine being the student nobody wanted to sit with, nobody wanted to partner with, nobody even acknowledged existed until the day he decided enough was enough. This is not just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when the kid everyone ignored comes back with a mind so sharp, so determined, that his revenge turned into one of the most satisfying victories you'll ever hear. If you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or disrespected and secretly wished you could rise above and prove everyone wrong, then this story is for you. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and buckle up because what you're about to hear is one of the most brilliantly executed revenge stories ever told. His name was Daniel, and for as long as he could remember, Daniel felt like a shadow in his own life. He wasn't the type of student who caused trouble. He wasn't loud. He wasn't athletic. He wasn't the kind of kid teachers remembered at the end of the day. No, Daniel was the kind of student you could pass in the hallway 100 times and still not recall his name. And maybe, just maybe, that's what hurt the most. Because being invisible is its own kind of pain. At home, Daniel was quiet. His parents were hardworking, always busy, often too exhausted to notice the silent struggles their son carried. He wasn't failing classes, but he wasn't excelling either. Just average. And in a world that worships the best and pities the worst, being average meant he disappeared into the background. But in school, invisibility wasn't just a feeling, it was a sentence. When teachers asked for volunteers, Daniel's hand often went unnoticed. When group projects were assigned, he was always the last one picked. The one students reluctantly accepted because no one else was left. And then there were the whispers, not cruel enough to be called bullying, but sharp enough to cut. He's so weird. Why doesn't he ever talk? Does he even have friends? Every word was like a pin pressed into Daniel's skin, and every day, he carried the silent wounds of being overlooked, dismissed, and ignored. But here's the thing about quiet people. They see everything. They notice the details everyone else misses. And Daniel? He was paying attention. He saw the way the so-called popular students treated others. How they mocked the kid with hand-me-down clothes. How they rolled their eyes at teachers. How they whispered cruel jokes behind fake smiles. Daniel absorbed it all, storing it in the vault of his memory. At first, he told himself it didn't matter, that being ignored was better than being ridiculed. But deep down, a fire was building. The breaking point came one cold November morning. The history teacher, Mr. Collins, had assigned a massive project, a presentation that would count for nearly half the semester's grade. Students were told to form groups of 4, and like always, Daniel stood off to the side, waiting, watching, hoping someone might finally notice him. They didn't. Every group formed quickly, laughter filling the room as students called out to friends, until finally, the only one left without a group was Daniel. Mr. Collins looked around and frowned. "Well, I guess you'll have to go solo, Daniel," he said, almost dismissively, already turning back to his desk. The class snickered. One boy whispered loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "Of course he's alone. Who'd want him?" The laughter that followed rang in Daniel's ears like church bells. That night, he sat in his small bedroom staring at the blank pages of his notebook. For the first time in his life, something inside him snapped. "No more," he whispered. His voice shook, but the fire behind it was steady. "I may be invisible to them, but I won't stay invisible forever." And that was the night Daniel decided he wasn't just going to do the project. He was going to make it unforgettable. He was going to make them regret ever ignoring him. From that night onward, Daniel changed. Not in a loud, dramatic way. He didn't suddenly become popular or start dressing differently. No, his change was quiet, calculated, a slow, burning determination that no one else could see. But Daniel felt it in every heartbeat. For the first time, he wasn't doing homework to simply pass. He wasn't doing research to fill up the minimum slides of a presentation. He was working as if the entire world depended on it, because to him it did. This was no longer a history project. This was his moment, his chance to prove, not just to his classmates, but to himself, that he was more than a shadow. that he could shine brighter than all of them combined. While his classmates wasted evenings gossiping, scrolling on their phones, or hanging out at the mall, Daniel buried himself in books. He scoured online archives, watched documentaries, and even spent hours at the public library digging into material most students didn't even know existed. The project was on revolutions that changed the world. Perfect, because Daniel felt like he was living through a revolution of his own inside his mind, inside his spirit. His classmates probably picked easy topics: the American Revolution, the French Revolution, maybe even a pop culture angle. But Daniel, he dug deeper. He chose something almost no one had heard of: the silent revolution in Finland's education system. At first glance, it sounded boring. Who would care about schools in Finland? But Daniel saw the brilliance. He saw how it mirrored his own life, ignored, overlooked, until it suddenly transformed and left the world stunned. And so, night after night, he worked. His small desk was covered in scribbled notes, highlighted books, and printouts stacked taller than his lamp. He practiced speaking in front of the mirror, recording himself on his old phone, then replaying it to critique every word, every pause, every nervous glance. The Daniel of yesterday would have stuttered, looked down, and rushed through. But the Daniel of today was preparing for war. Meanwhile, the antagonist, while Daniel worked, his classmates mocked him even more. In the cafeteria, he'd overhear them laughing. Look at him, always alone, probably doing the project nobody's even gonna care about. But he talks to himself in the mirror like a weirdo, who even listens when he speaks. I'll probably fall asleep. And worst of all, some teachers joined in without realizing it. One afternoon, when Daniel asked Mr. Collins a question about sources, the teacher sighed and muttered under his breath, "Overachieving won't make friends. Daniel, just do what you can." It stung. But Daniel didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just nodded and walked away. Because deep down, he knew his silence was his weapon. They thought his quietness meant weakness. But soon, it would be the very thing that made his revenge unforgettable. 2 weeks before the presentation, Daniel overheard something that turned his determination into steel. In the hallway, a group of students led by Jason, the loudest and most arrogant kid in class, were joking about the upcoming presentations. Jason laughed. "Honestly, I can't wait to see Daniel's. It'll probably be the best sleeping pill ever. Maybe we should bring pillows." Everyone laughed. Everyone, except Daniel, who turned the corner before they could see the flicker of fire in his eyes. That was the moment he swore. Not only would his presentation be great, not only would it silence the laughter, it would humiliate Jason and every single person who ever underestimated him. The planning Daniel didn't just want to make a good presentation. He wanted to deliver something unforgettable, something that would carve his name into the memory of every person in that classroom. Step by step, he crafted it. While others relied on Wikipedia, Daniel pulled statistics from government databases, real interviews, and education journals. Instead of dumping facts, he structured his presentation like a gripping narrative, starting with failure, building tension, and ending with triumph. He borrowed his cousin's laptop to design sleek, professional slides, clean, powerful, filled with striking images that made you feel the story instead of just hear it. He rehearsed until every pause, every glance, every shift in tone felt natural. In his bedroom, he transformed silence into confidence. And then came the final touch. A plan so clever it would ensure that his classmates couldn't laugh even if they wanted to. Daniel arranged with the school librarian to borrow a small projector with surround sound speakers. While most students would stand in front of the class with flimsy poster boards or bland slides, Daniel would transform the classroom into an immersive experience. The stage was set. The night before presentations, Daniel couldn't sleep. Not because he was nervous, but because he was excited. For years, he'd been invisible. For years, he'd eaten lunch alone, walked the halls unnoticed, and been the punchline of every whispered joke. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the boy they ignored would finally be seen, and he would make sure they never forgot it. The morning of the presentation arrived. The air inside the classroom was thick with anticipation and casual chatter. Students joked, shuffled papers, and some nervously clicked through their slides. But Daniel, he sat quietly at his desk, his bag tucked neatly at his side. No jitters, no fidgeting, just calm, almost unnervingly so. Jason, sitting across the room, smirked and leaned over to his friends. "Watch this," he whispered. "Bet Daniel's gonna bore us to death. I might start snoring just to make it interesting." His friends chuckled. The order of presentations was random, drawn from a pile of slips. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of humor. Daniel was called last. The entire morning, he watched. Student after student stumbled through generic slides filled with bullet points, monotone voices, and half-hearted jokes. There were yawns, whispers, and distracted scrolling on phones. By the time the second-to-last group finished, the room was exhausted. No one expected anything from the final act. "All right, Daniel," Mr. Collins said, glancing at the clock. "You're up. Let's keep it brief, please." A ripple of laughter moved through the class. Daniel rose slowly, clutching his bag. And in that moment something shifted. The quiet kid they thought they knew was gone. Daniel connected the projector, dimmed the classroom lights, and suddenly the wall came alive with crisp, high-quality visuals. The surround sound speakers hummed softly, catching the students off guard. "Today," Daniel began, his voice steady and commanding, "I'm not just going to talk about history. I'm going to show you how silence can change the world." The class stilled. It wasn't the Daniel they knew. His posture was confident, his tone magnetic. His eyes didn't dart nervously around. He looked directly at them, one by one, making them feel seen. He began weaving the story of Finland's silent education revolution. At first, the country had one of the worst school systems in Europe. Teachers were frustrated. Students were unmotivated. No one expected much from them. Sound familiar? Heads lifted. Some students even sat up straighter. Daniel continued, drawing parallels between the ignored students of Finland and the ignored people in everyday life. His voice rose and fell with emotion, pulling them deeper into the story. Then came the visuals, powerful images of empty classrooms, struggling children, and then the transformation into one of the most successful education systems in the world. Every slide hit like a punch. Every pause kept them hanging on his words. For the first time, the classroom was utterly silent, not out of boredom, but out of awe. As Daniel approached the end, he turned to his classmates and dropped the line he had been waiting to say. "You see, sometimes the people you ignore, the ones you laugh at, the ones you think are invisible, are the ones quietly preparing to change everything. Just like Finland, just like me." The words echoed in the room like thunder. Jason, who had been smirking at the start, now sat frozen, his face pale. His friends avoided eye contact. Even Mr. Collins leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Daniel clicked the final slide. On the screen appeared one sentence, bold and bright, and then silence. For a long moment, no one moved, no one even breathed. And then, slowly, the classroom erupted in applause. Not the polite, obligatory kind, but real applause. Loud, reluctant admiration breaking through pride. Some students even stood. Daniel didn't smile. He simply nodded, packed up his bag, and walked back to his seat. For the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible. That day changed everything. Jason tried to joke about it later, but the words fell flat. The image of Daniel's commanding presence, his brilliant mind, and the haunting line, "Just like me," was burned into everyone's memory. Teachers began calling on him more. Students approached him with respect, even curiosity. The same classmates who once ignored him now whispered about how smart he was, how confident he had become. But Daniel didn't seek their friendship. He didn't need it anymore. Because his revenge wasn't about joining their circle, it was about proving he never needed their validation in the first place. And he had done exactly that. Jason's humiliation became legendary in the school. The guy who once mocked Daniel now avoided his gaze. The memory of that day etched into his pride. And Daniel? He carried himself differently now. Taller, stronger, seen. His revenge hadn't been cruel. It hadn't been violent. It had been brilliant. and most of all undeniably satisfying. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't about tearing others down. It's about rising so high that the very people who doubted you have no choice but to look up. Daniel's story reminds us of one simple truth. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It means preparation. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? And of course, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Daniel didn't walk out of that classroom as the same boy who had walked in. Something inside him had shifted permanently. For years, he'd been the ghost the boy no one noticed, the seat filler in the back row, the name forgotten during roll call. But that day, he wasn't just noticed, he commanded attention. And the most satisfying part, he didn't need to scream, he didn't need to fight, he didn't even need to insult anyone. His revenge had been woven into his excellence. The ripple effect in the days that followed, the shockwaves of Daniel's presentation spread. At lunch, he no longer sat alone, not because he sought company, but because students who once ignored him now wanted to sit with him. They asked questions, curious about how he had done it. Some even asked for his help on their own projects. It was ironic. The same classmates who once mocked him for being boring now leaned on his intelligence like it was a lifeline. Jason, on the other hand, struggled. His identity as the loud, confident leader had been shattered. People still laughed at his jokes, but there was a hesitation, now a faint shadow of doubt in the room whenever he spoke. Because deep down, everyone remembered how Daniel had silenced him without saying his name. One afternoon, Jason confronted him in the hallway. "You think you're so smart now, huh?" Jason muttered, trying to sound tough. Daniel looked at him calmly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I don't need to think it," he said quietly. "You already know it." And then he walked away, leaving Jason standing there, red-faced and speechless. That moment sealed it. Daniel had gone from invisible to undeniable. The teacher's reaction, it wasn't just the students who changed. Teachers began noticing too. Mr. Collins, the same teacher who had dismissed Daniel as overachieving, stopped him after class one day. His voice carried an unfamiliar weight of respect. "Daniel," he said, adjusting his glasses, "that presentation, it was remarkable. I underestimated you. I shouldn't have. I hope you know you have a gift. Don't waste it." For Daniel, those words meant more than the applause, because for once, an adult, the very system that had overlooked him, finally saw what he was capable of. When Daniel got home that night after the presentation, he didn't rush to brag. He didn't post about it online or demand praise. Instead, he simply placed his graded project folder on the kitchen table where his parents could see it. And a plus gleamed in red ink across the top. But even more striking was the handwritten note from Mr. Collins. "Extraordinary work. Your voice matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His mother picked it up first, her eyes widening. "Daniel, this is incredible." For the first time in a long while, his father set down his newspaper and really looked at him. "I always knew you had something in you," he said, a rare smile breaking across his face. "Guess you finally showed them." Daniel didn't need their validation, but hearing it, it was healing. Because revenge wasn't just about punishing others, it was about reclaiming the pieces of yourself they tried to erase. Late that night, as Daniel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he replayed the moment of silence after his presentation. The looks on their faces, the shock in Jason's eyes, the applause that erupted like thunder. It wasn't just satisfaction, it was justice. He realized something powerful. People may ignore you, they may underestimate you, but silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you're watching, it means you're waiting, and when the right moment comes, you strike, and the impact is unforgettable. Life beyond that day, Daniel carried that lesson with him for years. In college, when professors overlooked him, he remembered. At work, when colleagues doubted him, he remembered. Even in his personal life, whenever people underestimated his quiet nature, he remembered, because he had already lived through the most important proof that even the quietest student in the room could command the loudest respect when the time was right. And as for Jason, well, he faded. The boy who had once been loudest became just another forgotten name, while Daniel's reputation only grew. Revenge hadn't just balanced the scales, it had rewritten the story entirely. Daniel's story is proof that revenge doesn't always come with shouting, fists, or cruelty. Sometimes, the sweetest form of payback is simply showing the world who you really are without apology, without hesitation. And maybe that's the greatest lesson for all of us, that we don't need to fight to be seen. We need to rise. We need to let our excellence do the talking, because one day, the same people who ignored you will have no choice but to remember your name. So tell me, have you ever been underestimated, only to rise above and prove everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to read them. And if Daniel's journey gave you chills, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell for more real, emotionally charged stories that will keep you hooked until the very last word, because sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest revenge.